Starting today, you're gonna take care of me. You're my daughter-in-law, so forget about having any freedom. I won't do any caregiving. Goodbye. I guess my mother-in-law didn't expect me to refuse so bluntly. She was stunned. How can you say such a thing? Taking care of me is your duty as a daughter-in-law. Then why don't you ask your beloved girlfriend to do it? With that, I left my in-laws' house. My name is Emily, and I'm 28 years old. I just got divorced recently. My mother passed away when I was in 5th grade, so my father raised me. I come from a single-father household. That father also passed away in a car accident when I was in my junior year of high school. Having become an orphan, I lived in a facility until I graduated from high school. After graduating, I started working as an office clerk at a construction company and began living alone in an apartment. I had no romantic relationships like other young women. At 26, hearing about a friend from the facility who got married to someone she met on a dating app, I felt envious and quickly signed up for the app myself. On the app, I could start relationships easily, but as soon as men heard I'd spent almost a year in a facility, they all left. The only relationship that lasted was with a guy my age named Mike. Mike, being the eldest son, said that even after marriage we would live at his family's home. Whenever I mention living at home after marriage, women run away. I get the same reaction from men when I say I lived in a facility. We laughed like this, and that's how our relationship started. After dating for about a year, Mike proposed to me, and thinking I'd finally have a family, I happily agreed. I was a bit excited and hopeful about living in a suburban house with my in-laws. Emily, I heard you used to help your dad with household chores when you were young. What a wonderful girl. I bet you're great at cooking too. My mother-in-law said this gently when I visited to greet them before marriage. Raised in a single-father home and having tough memories from the facility, I thought about living with my in-laws, being filial to my mother-in-law, and sometimes seeking her comfort. It was a relief when she said she would receive my belongings at the in-laws' house after I moved out of my apartment 3 days after the wedding. At 9 a.m., the moving truck arrived, and my few belongings were quickly loaded into a small truck. After cleaning the apartment and checking the utilities, I finished the necessary paperwork at the office and headed to my in-laws' house with high spirits. It was a weekday, and I had taken a day off for the move. When I arrived, I noticed some of my boxes were already unpacked. Thanks for starting to organize my things. But then, unbelievable words came back. You're just after a property, aren't you? The proof is that there's hardly anything of value in your stuff. You must have seduced Mike just to live in a house. Typical of a poor girl. I was momentarily confused. Was this the same person I met before the wedding? Why had she changed so drastically? My head was filled with questions, but I began to understand what my mother-in-law was saying. Looking where she pointed, I saw my Coach bag hanging among her bags in the hallway. I couldn't afford luxury brands, but I had wanted at least one nice bag, so I bought it from a Coach outlet online using part of my bonus. It was essentially my only valuable possession, and my mother-in-law had taken it as if it were hers. Please give it back. It's mine, and you can't just open my boxes and do whatever you want. I couldn't help but raise my voice. Then came an unbelievable reply. Don't be ridiculous as a daughter-in-law. What's yours is mine. More importantly, living in a house means cleaning inside and out, so I need to teach you. Wondering what she would make me do, I followed her out the door. It was just a moment. My mother-in-law pushed me from behind, and I plunged face first into the drainage ditch in front of the entrance. As I began to pick myself up, I heard her mocking laughter. Just got dirty, huh? It would have been funnier if you got hurt too. Satisfied with my fall into the ditch, she closed and locked the front door. Covered in mud, I knew I had to find a way into the house. She clearly wasn't going to open the door for me. Knowing she would interfere by any means if she realized I wanted to get inside, I quietly entered the property and headed to the southern side where the garden was. Just then, my mother-in-law was putting away bedding, so I pressed myself against the western wall and waited. The dirty water was seeping into my clothes, making me cold, and I felt a sneeze coming on. But I couldn't give up now, so I desperately held it back. When it seemed like she had finished with the bedding, I moved to a window on the south side. As I thought, she had left the window unlocked, planning to lock it after putting away the bedding. I entered the house through there and hurried to the bathroom. I quickly stripped off my muddy clothes, rummaged through a cardboard box for a bath towel and bathrobe, and started showering. But a few minutes into my shower, my mother-in-law began pounding on the bathroom door. "You pay before you use a bath. Don't use someone else's bathroom without permission." At that moment, I clearly realized. It was because of her that Mike couldn't get married. When my husband returned home, I told him about the truck incident, the drainage ditch incident, the Coach bag incident, and how it seemed my high-end skincare products had been used by my mother-in-law. "And that's why I had such a terrible time," I said. "Terrible? Don't ever speak ill of my mother again. This house was inherited by her, an only child, from her parents. My dad died when I was in 2nd grade, but we managed to get by till today because of this house. Living here for free is all thanks to her. So, Mike is just a mama's boy. You don't have anywhere else to go, do you? It's brazen of you to stay in this house without paying rent. Instead, you'd better dedicate yourself to us as payment." That was my mother-in-law's favorite thing to say. Mike never contributes to the household expenses. I buy necessities and groceries out of my own income. It seems neither my mother-in-law nor Mike is satisfied with anything I do. "Your meals are so repetitive. It's like you're serving leftovers every day." I thought I had been doing well, alternating fish and meat dishes. But it seems they dislike everything I do. "What about contributing to the household expenses?" "Household expenses? Bringing a poor woman like you here was meant for you to work hard in both your job and house chores, like a horse. Don't you get it yet? Do you know where Mike is right now?" About 2 months after our marriage, she suddenly asked me this. "Maybe at work or on the train home, right? He's at his favorite girlfriend's house." "What? Really? There's a girl he really likes, Natalie, you know. But when she came to greet us and didn't like something here, she refused to live with me. I told Mike he couldn't marry a woman who wouldn't live with me and in this house, so they broke up." "Why is he still seeing a woman he broke up with?" "You're such a dimwit. They just decided not to get married but are still in a good relationship. I didn't like it, so I decided to take out my frustration on whoever Mike brought home as his wife, thinking it would be Natalie. And then you showed up. It's pathetic to realize I'm being harassed every day just because of that." Then the incident happened. As I was about to enter the bathroom, a bath towel was on the floor, and I slipped. The fall hurt all over. Mike was home, so I shouted for help, but there was no response. I had no choice but to crawl out of the bathroom, hastily wrap myself in whatever I had just taken off in the changing room, and crawl to my bag. In my bag were my card case, wallet, and phone. I figured with these, I could manage somehow. Since both my husband and mother-in-law were ignoring me, I reluctantly called an ambulance using my phone, crawled to the entrance to wait for the paramedics, and was taken to the hospital. I was diagnosed with a fractured foot, and since I hit my head on the wall when I fell, I needed to have brain scans and ended up being hospitalized. I messaged Mike about being hospitalized. He read the message but didn't reply to ask which hospital, which means he probably doesn't care about me. He's likely gone off to be with that Natalie woman, thinking it's convenient for him. Other patients had their families bring them pajamas and change of clothes, and their used items were taken home for laundry. With no family visiting, I had no choice but to wear the hospital's rental clothes. The rentals had the hospital's name embroidered prominently on the left chest pocket, which was quite noticeable. Walking awkwardly with crutches to the toilet, I endured the stares of people comparing the embroidery on my right chest with my face. During visiting hours, patients' rooms became noisy with families and friends crowding in, and some patients even got cautioned by nurses for the disturbance. On my 6th day of hospitalization, the female doctor who examined me on the night I was admitted explained the results of my tests and the prospects of my discharge. "Could you possibly postpone my discharge date as much as possible?" I pleaded with her. To my surprise, she smiled gently and said, "It seems like you have some serious reasons." The doctor asked me to wait outside the consultation room, and after a few minutes, she appeared with a wheelchair, urging me to sit. She then pushed me to the hospital's rooftop. "I've been concerned about the circumstances leading to your injury ever since the night you were brought in." Hearing this, tears came before words, and I couldn't stop crying. Just the thought that someone cared about me filled me with overwhelming happiness. The doctor spoke kindly to me as I struggled to speak through tears. She patiently waited for me to calm down and listened to my story seriously. She also shared some similar cases she knew of, which was quite striking. "It seems safer for you not to return there ever again," she said gently. "That's why I wanted to postpone my discharge." "But even if we delay your discharge, going back to such a place full of anxiety is pointless," she reasoned. "Earlier, you mentioned a patient who gathered evidence of domestic violence from her husband and won compensation. How can I gather such evidence? I plan to leave that house eventually, but I want to make sure I get my revenge properly." Understanding my firm resolve, the doctor repeated the importance of never returning to my in-laws' house for my safety, but then she provided me with various useful information. She mentioned that there's a wide variety of hidden cameras available, resembling Starbucks cups, pens, or even glasses. Since I always wear glasses at home after taking off my contacts, the glasses type seemed particularly useful. I deserve to be treated as an important individual. And I can't settle my feelings without proper retribution. 2 weeks later, with the doctor's concerned words, "Please come to the hospital if anything happens, and don't overdo it," I was discharged. Armed with various voice recorders and hidden cameras I had ordered online, delivered to the doctor's home. I had spent nearly my card's limit on this equipment, but to someone who had resolved to face death once, this seemed trivial. The doctor had also prepared 2 crutches for me. I had done a lot of walking training in the hospital's rehabilitation room, so they weren't absolutely necessary. But she had rented them for my safety. That kind of family, knowing you have a fracture, might try to knock you down or push you to fall. But psychologically, it's hard for someone to aggressively attack another person who is using crutches. Think of these crutches as a weapon to stop their attacks, and if you ever feel in grave danger, use them to strike back. I was grateful for the crutches, but more so, I was touched that someone cared enough to think about my safety in such detail. Upon my early discharge, my mother-in-law reacted just as I had anticipated. However, I wasn't saddened by anything she said. In fact, I was wearing hidden camera glasses and had voice recorders in my bag and coat pockets, successfully gathering evidence. The worse she spoke, the more I inwardly smirked, thinking, "You're just making things worse for yourself. You've been gone from this house for 2 months, and yet you have the nerve to come back? I thought you'd run away somewhere because you found it hard to return." "Well, you say that, but weren't you the one who laid the bath towel in the bathroom, causing me to fall? It wasn't my choice to leave. Your actions caused my fracture and hospitalization. How dare you address me, your mother-in-law, so informally? I've let you live in this house for free, and yet you're so ungrateful. So, you admit to laying the towel down to harm me, even to the point of death?" "Of course. As the head of this house, I can do whatever I want." I found it somewhat amusing to hear such terrible things. Each cruel action by my mother-in-law was turning into advantageous evidence for me. The next morning was even more dramatic. There's a 30-minute gap between my husband leaving for work and my departure. My mother-in-law always plotted something during this time. As I headed to the entrance, she stealthily approached from behind and kicked my right crutch. Although I couldn't capture the moment on my glasses camera, I exaggeratedly fell and struck her head hard with my left crutch. She too fell face first to the floor. With voice recorders in my bag and computer shoulder bag turned on, I spoke loudly before she could yell. "How could you do that? Kicking away one of the crutches of someone who can't walk without them? I can't stand having a stranger like you in this house. You should have been gone to the other world by now, not walking around with these crutches. This was exactly what I wanted. I no longer felt bothered by her cruel words. Rather, I was pleased, as each word added to the evidence in my favor. And it seemed she hadn't realized that I had intentionally struck her with my crutch. Her harassment and sarcasm continued, but it was all playing into my hands. As evidence piled up like a snowball. Since the incident with the crutch, I noticed her reactions had become slower. Where's the curry powder I kept on this shelf? It's just a misunderstanding. It's always in this cupboard. Oh, as long as it's there. I had moved the curry powder that was always on the shelf to the cabinet with folding doors, and it seemed like my mother-in-law realized it was her misunderstanding. It appeared that the hit from my crutch had indeed had an effect. You're such a terrible wife. That's probably why Mike's coming home late tonight again. Mike is probably at Natalie's place. Natalie, who didn't want to live with you, is likely telling Mike all the reasons she dislikes you right now. My mother-in-law, shaking with anger, threw a radish at me. I quickly dodged it, causing the radish to crash into the window and break the glass. Knowing everything was being recorded, I made sure to speak clearly for the voice recorders. That's terrible. Were you trying to hit me in the head with that radish? When Mike returned home, he was furious. It looks like you broke this window. Trying to make my mother sick in this cold? It was your mom who threw the radish. You must have provoked her to do it. You're just lazing around with a little fracture, skipping work, slacking off at home chores, living a lazy life, and now this disgraceful act? One day, my mother-in-law was in a traffic accident and got hospitalized. According to the police and the driver who hit her, she suddenly stepped onto a non-crosswalk road and couldn't be avoided. Her belief that pedestrians should always be avoided by cars had led to this accident. She should have been used to dodging cars with that mindset. But I think my crutch hit had slowed her reactions, preventing her from avoiding the car. With my mother-in-law hospitalized, I finally had some peaceful time at home. On weekends when Mike visited Natalie, I enjoyed my time alone, watching movies I had rented. Meanwhile, Mike seemed busy arranging for my mother-in-law's care after her accident left her partially paralyzed. It's only natural. He had to deal with getting a care bed, selecting a care manager, and meeting with helpers. He tried to push these responsibilities onto me, but I refused to take on any, leaving it all to him. During this time, I quietly proceeded with my plan. I leased an apartment an hour's drive away and moved my belongings there little by taxi while Mike was at work. The day Mike brought my mother-in-law home from the hospital, he said, "Now you can't escape. You'll start taking care of my mother from today. Starting today, you're gonna take care of me. You're my daughter-in-law, so you owe me that much." At that moment, I pressed a button. I can't stand having a stranger like you in this house. You should have been gone to the other world by now, not walking around with these crutches. My mother-in-law's insults played at maximum volume from the voice recorder throughout the house. One after another, her recorded abuses echoed. Care for you? No way. I won't care for a stranger. Grab that strange device from her hand. Turn it off quickly. I have plenty more where that came from. I have 3 more copies. I'll submit this along with the footage from the hidden camera. I'm filing a civil lawsuit. My lawyer has everything prepared. Then, I showed the nearly completed divorce papers. You're joking, right? Where will you go, being all alone? Lawyers, divorce. Stop talking nonsense and change my diaper. How would you feel in my place? Would you want to take care of someone who hurled those words at you? Your actions merit police involvement for assault and insult. If you don't agree to the divorce, I'll contact my lawyer and have the police here in no time. Intimidated by the mention of police, Mike obediently filled out the divorce papers and handed them to me. You and your detestable family, who are nothing but strangers to me, I'm finally free from you all. To this, Mike, belatedly filled with regret, pleaded with me. It's a misunderstanding. I underestimated you. I thought you were a woman who would endure anything in this house. Please come back after cooling off a bit. Right. Marrying you was proof that Mike saw you as the only real woman for him. Stretch your wings a bit and then come back. Let's live together, the three of us. With you strangers? You must be joking. If you had treated me like a normal person, I might have happily taken on the caregiving. If only you had welcomed me warmly into the family when I first married and came here. I'm leaving a voice recorder here. Listen to it daily to remind yourselves of what you've done. And with that, I left my in-laws' house behind. According to my lawyer, my bedridden mother-in-law and husband were subjected to police investigation and were charged with assault, injury, and insult. This proved that what they did to me was an act unforgivable as a human being. I received a substantial amount as compensation and for emotional distress. The money that came to me meant that Mike and his mother had to struggle, mortgaging their house and taking on debt. I heard from my lawyer that they were having a hard time. Furthermore, Mike, having been involved with the police, was forced to resign from his job. Each time my lawyer visited Mike and his mother, he noticed Mike becoming more haggard. The doctor who advised me provided various suggestions. While continuing my job at the construction company, I decided to learn something new for a side job. After my experience, I deeply understood how having a sum of money can save one's life. The doctor told me that programming could be a lifesaver, and with the money I received from my ex-husband and his mother, I started learning programming and took my first step forward. As my online programming lessons took off and I began dating a man I met through programming, I was in high spirits. That's when I was shocked to hear the news: bodies found in a suspected murder-suicide in a house. The names of the deceased mother and son in the news ticker were those of my former mother-in-law and husband. The news suggested it was a desperate murder-suicide due to the hardships of caregiving, but I doubted that the end of those two could be so beautiful. Regardless, those who tried to end my life were gone, and I was living actively, moving towards my next step. This was, in its own way,